evening, everybody. This evening, we'll start with a special board meeting. We have a couple of agenda items, and then we'll reconvene in our work session for this evening. So, Kenzie, please call roll.
Becker.
Here.
McCoy. Here. Lyerly.
Here.
Gerlach.
Here.
Minnow.
Here.
Knell.
Here.
Meister. Here.
All right, everyone is present and accounted for. Lynn, would you please read the motion for action item 2A?
I move that the resignation of staff as presented be approved.
The second?
Second.
Discussion? Kenzie?
Online voting is now open. Andrew, are you able to vote online?
I'm still working on, I'll vote aye for this one.
All votes have been entered and the motion is carried with all board members voting in favor.
Thank you. 2B, Lynn?
I move that the retirement of staff as presented be approved.
Second.
Any discussion? Kenzie?
Online voting is now open. Andrew, do you want a voice vote again?
I'll vote aye.
All votes have been entered and the motion is carried with all board members voting in favor.
All right, Lynn, would you move to 2C and read the motion, please?
I move that the Board of Education enter into the agreement with SRL2 to modify the warranty deed dated June 15th, 2025 for the former Weequahic School property as presented be approved.
Second.
Discussion? Alex?
I just wanted to provide the board perhaps, and more so the public, if anything, some extra context behind my intended vote. Just a quick reminder that I speak for myself as always and not the entire group. Ultimately, this deed restriction or a deed restriction was agreed to when Weequahic School was purchased. It is not, in my opinion, properly being honored less than a year after being agreed to. I cannot support this when the direct benefactor is an entity and a situation that, in my mind, will with near 100% certainty result in a further decrease to our district enrollment, particularly for voucher students, which directly increases the taxes of every property owner in our school district. For context, vouchers this year cost me about $400 to my property taxes on one house. There is nothing that the district did wrong or could have predicted with the initial sale of this property. The situation our district is now in was not supposed to happen and leaves me with no trust with the involved party. I also do not take kindly to being cornered, and I will not be bullied. I do not operate that way, and I never will. I stand by what I say, and I'm going to do. And unfortunately, I do not think that we can always expect the same in return. I'm fairly sure I will be alone in this vote, and in the end, will probably be better off for it. But on behalf of our district taxpayers, I would rather fight, and I will be voting no.
Thank you, Alex. Others? Lynn?
I cannot disagree with Alex, and I feel the same way. That said, I feel like we are in a very difficult situation. We don't have a lot of options, and we are in a bind here with a lot of more important things that we have to put our energy and our time into and our resources. We certainly don't have the money for litigation. I feel very disrespected by this situation, not me personally, but the board. I appreciate your feelings, Alex, but I think that the best thing for us to do is to accept the situation as it is now and to move forward, and I will hold my nose and vote yes.
Others? Andrew?
So I just want to say that going forward, not that I intend to have us be in a situation where we're selling schools again, but if we are selling anything, I think it would maybe behoove us to get, I know we've been told, well, you're not supposed to be in the real estate business, et cetera. Maybe it's worth consideration to keep a little bit more control over properties and see if we could be, long-term leasing or doing something else that would give us more control, so we aren't stuck with these unfortunate situations.
Thank you, Andrew. Others? Okay, Laura?
Can we take a voice vote, please?
Yes, any member which has the ability to request a voice vote. So Kinsey, can you facilitate that, please? Any other discussion? Yeah, we're ready. Thank you.
Minnow?
No.
Pennell?
Yes.
Meister?
Yes.
Gerlach?
Yes.
Lyerly?
Yes.
Becker?
No,
McCoy?
No.
Motion carries.
Thank you, everybody. And with that, we come to the end of the agenda for the special board meeting. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Switch over to the next meeting, please.
Can I just take one moment?
Yep, actually, we're gonna take a 5-minute recess. I have a few papers to sign, and then we'll come back and do the meeting. All right, thank you for your patience. We will call the February 9th, 2026 Board of Education work session to order. Kenzie, can you please call roll?
Meister,
Here.
Cannell,
Here.
Minnow,
Here.
Gerlach,
Here.
Here.
McCoy,
Here.
Becker.
Here.
We are all still present and accounted for. Thank you. All right, do we have anyone for open forum or public forum tonight? Don't have anyone registered, anyone wanting to speak? Last call. All right, thank you. We'll move on to the agenda. So we'll call David Johns to the table to go through the strategic planning section. And others, right? So before Mr. Johns gets started, we're trying something new this board meeting. They have, in advance of the meeting, filmed a screencast of their presentation. So we have all been able to view it in advance in lieu of a at board table presentation. So I think it'll go a little bit differently tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Lyerly. Good evening, board, student leaders. Appreciate the opportunity to provide another check-in again on our strategic plan and our progress in the domain of thriving student body. As Mr. Lyerly said, the content for this presentation has been created for you by the team at the table. We will have access to the slides. So as we proceed through, if there are certain things that you want to emphasize or ask questions about or comment about, I'll be listening and navigating so that we can get that on the screen. We'll also be posting the screencast to our YouTube site where we will have a channel dedicated to our strategic plan updates. And so the community can also pick up the full screencast there, as well as the posted slides and memo that are in board docs. So with me this evening are the creators of this content that you've had an opportunity to dig into over the weekend. Dr. Eric Kahn, Director of Curricular Pathways and Post-Secondary Partnerships is here. Katie Suko and Christina Jingle, both Associate Directors of Pupil Services, are here as well. Our focus as we reconnect with our strategic plan and the priority area of thriving student body is in the area of sense of belonging, teacher-student relationships, and the customized success plan. And my colleagues are here to talk more about and talk with you about their efforts so far and what we're learning as we proceed through this work. For your benefit, if you should find it valuable, there are a few topics that we've thought in advance and previewed in terms of possible conversation starters or some things that you might be interested in connecting with. These are not meant to direct your conversation. They're simply here should they connect with some of the things that you've been thinking about as you work through the screencast. I'll leave these up here, but again, encouraging you to move this in whichever direction you're inspired by based on viewing the screencast.
So board members, if you have any questions for the team. So I have a couple now, and I'm going to kind of take them in order. Like the first section, looking at the baseline data for spring of 2025 and the sense of belonging, I'm really interested in understanding if we've been able to ascertain what really is the difference between sense of belonging and teacher and student relationships, why one lags behind the other. It seems like they would be related in some way, and why do they have a more positive reflection on their relationships with the adults at the school, but still don't communicate a sense of belonging?
That is a great observation that I don't know that we have a great response for. On the other slide, we did put the definitions of the two from Panorama, and I don't know if it has to do with the subset of questions that comprise each area that you see such a big difference in that baseline data. But yes, that's a really interesting question that I think maybe we need to take that back to our Panorama and dig a little bit further into that.
See if it's just an issue with the instrument or the data collection instrument that kind of creates that variation. I
Yes,
appreciate
yes,
that.
thank you for that observation.
I want to add just another piece to this as we do that. And again, a great question and one that has me wondering. Both a sense of belonging and student-teacher relationships or any other category that we use within Panorama actually is a set of questions behind that topic. And some questions carry certain weight over others. And so we'll dig in and see what those questions are. Again, there's about 8 to 10 questions behind both of these larger categories. So there might be something to that once we drill down to that level.
I'm going to pause to see if there's anyone else that has a question. Jeanette? Mike, please.
Since we're talking about the Panorama survey, I just had a couple questions here. Is the survey 100% anonymous? And what type of response do you get? Do you get 100% of the students responding? I doubt you get 100%, but maybe you do. Yeah, and is it totally anonymous?
Thank you. Right now, the survey is anonymous. I would say that we are not at 100%, but we have been working really hard with our schools to be able to reach as high as we possibly can, and we have been above that 90% mark pretty traditionally.
Alex?
My question centers around the advisory. So I only know for certain that one person has been around the district since kind of around the time that I started or even earlier. And I say that because things have morphed a lot over the years, where one of the schools I was at for a lot of years was the only one that had an advisory. And then obviously through COVID and changes, afterwards, our advisory has taken shape in a lot of different ways. So my question is if you have the ability to, have you gleaned any information from all of the different past examples or versions of advisory and what has worked and not worked to guide with any clarity what we want it to look like going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's exactly what we've been trying to do. Because as you referenced, we implemented advisory during the pandemic, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity to plan ahead of time for content. So initially, it was just about having that dedicated time and space for those relationships that we knew were so critical during the pandemic. And what we heard from buildings was that they also needed some content. So we did a number of things. We pulled together district teams. We provided a number of resources. We provided content. And then what we've heard from buildings is that this is great, but we also need some autonomy to be able to leverage advisory to really meet our building needs. And so as a district, what we've been trying to do is find that happy balance. And so through our partnerships with our targeted schools that we referenced in our presentation, it's a lot of that. So we're trying to provide some overall parameters that our buildings would follow, but also allowing for some autonomy. So we need to have some of that consistency, but we also want them to be able to, through the feedback cycles that we talked about, be responsive to their teacher and student voice as well.
Others? So my last question on this part was your choice of target in the 5-year target is 79, 76. Is that pinned to anything, or is it just representative of a particular percentage shift?
Yeah. Yeah, so with the 5-year goal, we looked at our national data that was normed through Panorama. And we also we have some evidence right now, actually at a secondary school, at our secondary level, 612, where we've seen some great gains in sense of belonging, around 6 percentage points of favorability. So we believe that between that 2 and 6 percentage point increase of favorable response each year would lead us to that 5-year goal. So we did do some comparisons internally with our internal data, and then we also looked at some of our national norming data.
So when you looked at the national norming data, what does 79% represent? Is that towards average, or is that, when you're talking about sense of belonging, when you norm it, what do you get from that norming process?
What that's telling us currently is that with a 79% rate of favorable response, we would fall within a certain range. Sorry, I'm speaking this out loud on the national data. So what I could say is a 79% would put us into a certain percentile on the national norm in
And-
Panorama.
Right. And I understand that. And that's what I was expecting you to say. Can you name the percentile, right? What's our target against national data?
We'll have to get back to you with that because I would hate to say without certainty and we need
Sure.
to go back and look at that data.
I would appreciate that, though. Thank you. Just to know what our target is against that normed data set.
Yeah, and I think that even informs as the plan and the reporting of the plan evolves and grows, how we would even represent it as an annual target, whether we hold to just our own growth, but then represent that in relation to where that would put us in a national norm. A great advantage of using Panorama is that it is so widely used around the country, billions and billions of data points that help you place yourself in relation to where other schools and districts are within comparable settings.
Sam.
Just looking at kind of how the data is being presented here, obviously we've got the grades 3 through 5. Is there a way to separate out the middle level from the high school level? Only because 612 is currently lumped as one. And I'm just curious based on, if our middle schools are reporting really high rates, but our high schools are reporting really low rates, then that kind of muddies the waters to not see where things are falling. So.
Yeah, that could be done through some disaggregation based on school reporting. It doesn't come to us that way, but we can do some work on that. Yeah.
Alex.
I apologize in advance for a potentially complicated question. I don't know how to make it easier, but in short as I can make it, we've kind of in recent years transformed our outlook and our use of study halls at the high school level. And in short, correct me if I'm wrong, we've kind of leaned towards a reduction in that kind of as a general part of the schedule. That being true or not, my question kind of is, while also factoring in an impending schedule change across the district at the high school level, is there any concern? Did you have any concrete thoughts on, how study hall and then the number one thing that I look at in the data report, where it talks about key suggestions and examples of students, the number one thing significantly was academic support in study hall, dedicated time for homework, catching up on missing work, silent study. And obviously with, that's hard to do in the resource time for a variety of reasons I think we can all get. So how does that factor into being able to meet that clear need that had a built-in avenue in the past?
Yes, absolutely. We heard that not only through that survey that you're referencing, but also when we went out to conduct our focus groups. And really, it's not just about another study hall, but it was about those intentional connections with the teachers and getting the support from their algebra teacher or from their science teacher that then they didn't have to give up their lunch or give up an after school time. And it allowed also for them to retake tests, all that sort of thing, so that they definitely wanted a component of advisory time dedicated to that purpose.
So to follow up, are we missing anything in the practicality, the feasibility of a 20-30 minute advisory time where we can't do those things that really need that more intensive opportunity and or amount of time? Are we maybe overlooking that? We see the express need, we get it, but are we factoring that in, or have you thought about that yet as far as what that might look like in a concrete fashion to make sure we are addressing that need? Just out of curiosity. If
I think it definitely would be something to consider. I think what we're looking at advisory and that academic support is in addition to what that they're already receiving in the classroom and instead of like in lieu of. So I think the thought process was that shortened time for advisory would be sufficient, but definitely something to consider.
Sorry, and one more follow-up because I guess maybe I should have started with what are study hall offerings for students right now as it stands this year? For high school in particular.
So I know that they encourage you to take one study hall usually per semester. So most students have one study hall first semester, then one second semester. And then I know if you're taking classes at UWGB, then you get a bunch of off-campus time. So for me personally, I have a 1 through 6, and then I go home for the rest of the day. And I also have a third hour study hall, but that's because I have UWGB classes where I use that time for that.
What does it look like for freshmen? Do they all have a study hall automatic? Is it kind of open based on student? Do none of them have it? Because at least information I have that's outdated at this point, some of that was in flux and there was different guidance that, and we were modifying that 3-4 years ago. I'm just curious if you know any of that now. If not, that's okay.
I think right now given the fact that we have 3 schools on one daily schedule, which is an 8-period day, and another school on a trimester, currently, I think variance is the norm. As we move to a consistent 7-period day, it takes a period out of the schedule, which would often be filled with study halls. I've worked very hard with high school leadership to reinforce the importance of minimizing multiple study halls throughout the day. Let's have our teachers teaching and let's have our kids in classes. So as we move into that 7-period day, we should come to a more predictable medium. I don't know what that means exactly for freshmen though.
Other questions or discussion? Excuse me. I have one question about the second strategic goal, Mr. Khan. I was just trying to figure out what are the current year's goal just to lay down the framework. It looks like there's baseline data. What are the kind of ins and outs or the details that's taking a year to just lay down a framework is the question.
Sure, there's a couple different pieces related to that. Excuse me. One is just the current data that we are collecting. So it's a matter of what we have available to us. And as we were unpacking that, it's the number of data points that we wish we would have had as part of a comprehensive plan that a number of them are already outlined in some of our other strategic plan goals. But we want to make sure that we have that comprehensively for every student laid out, as well as like we talked about in the recording, that we want to have a location that's accessible by all with a good data collection of it. So having the plan is one thing, but having it in a location that is accessible and does all the things that we talked about with data availability and ease of use for entry, that takes a little bit longer than just collecting the data in one location.
Okay, so this is not a reuse of current systems potentially, or is it just selecting which system to reuse for this purpose?
Correct, and that's what we're looking at. I mean, we started with Infinite Campus just because that's the main student information system, and we're unpacking that right now. But we're also looking at other systems that we have that may offer opportunities as well.
All right, thank you. Jeanette.
Since we moved on to the second, I had some questions regarding student plans. And when I was looking over this, I was thinking about kids who are put into a track and they're on that academic track and they don't have other opportunities. This is what I saw when my kids were in school, when I myself back in the dinosaur years was in school. You were put in a track and that's where you went, and you didn't get to dabble in some of the other things. I was very good at math. I learned in 1970 4, how to program a computer. And that's the track I was on. And my career ended up being a physical therapist, very science-based. But I had to take a biology class, and they put me in the lowest level biology class so I could take the highest level math classes. I was very tracked. I saw that also with my kids who graduated in the early 2000s. And I don't think that's really great for students. So how does this plan, is that what happens with this plan, or is there flexibility? Is the child encouraged, is the student encouraged to investigate a few other things, even though they may be very much, oh, this is what I'm good at? Is that opportunity there?
Great question. Yeah, the goal is really student agency, student voice. The goal is to make sure that we're opening up every door and every possibility to provide students with opportunities through coursework, through experiential learning, on-site, off-site. There's a lot of experiences that kids are engaging with off campus as well as on campus. We want to be opening as many doors as we possibly can. The goal is really to help students to be able to know what they're hoping to do post-secondary, and that we're preparing them to launch into that post-secondary pathway. And we know that there's going to be flexibility in that because our passions, our pursuits, our interests change all the time. But if a student has a goal that they want to achieve, our goal is to help them to make that happen.
I think it's good to have a chance to take whatever class you want. Like I know sophomore year I had an open period, so I took an art class. I will not ever probably do an art class again, but it was fun just to go in and just do an art class.
Alex.
Do these plans, so how does this fit in with any of the other career planning, like the ACP and stuff that we're required to do? Is this duplicative? Is it, I mean, how does it fit in? How do you envision it fitting in, I guess?
I would say it's an enhancement of the academic and career planning process, in the sense of we wanted to not limit it to just career planning. And that's one of the things that, I mean, it came up in the previous comments. We added the component of personal pursuits in there for the purpose of having a discussion of what students may want to explore that isn't tied to that career outcome, whether it's an interest area or a hobby or just something you want to try. So it's taking what is part of that we're required to do, but also expanding it to be more comprehensive of student interests and what those students' goals are, both for the career and their life preparedness.
So is it possible, or do you envision kind of putting these two together instead of like having what I think is essentially two separate things? Okay.
Yes, and we're not required specifically to have that type of plan per student. We want to have every student have that type of plan.
Other discussion or questions? Samantha?
I just had a bit of a clarifying question. The benchmark information that was shared on this one, I know in the screencast, there was some discussion about how they usually complete one element of that in the middle school years and then the other in the high school years. Is there any conversation? So finding the overlap of that can be tricky when you're only looking at a shortened time period. Is there discussion of having the pieces that are happening in the middle level being revisited, or not maybe fully redone, but having that reopened for as part of this additional exploration to make sure that there's updated information as kids are into the high school?
Short answer is yes. So as we're looking at knowing we want more current data for our students for any number of reasons, we want to have those checkpoints throughout, especially their early high school years in addition to middle school. So students are recording what their interest areas are.
Others? Yep.
I will just say that the communications I will with my freshmen, we will be attending their planning meeting next Friday. So the communications around that have been great, and to see it all kind of come in action has been exciting. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Others? Thank you very much. Okay, at this time, I'm going to transition the chair to Laura McCoy so she can lead us through the operations portion of the agenda.
Okay. The first thing we're going to have is a presentation regarding our 2024-2025 financial audit. And Angie Robley.
Good evening, everybody. So I have with me John Troutman. You may recognize him from previous years. He's been with the district for several years. We've worked with him for our annual audit. So John is going to cover kind of an overview of where we stand for 24-25. I know that seems like a long time ago, but this is how we operate in like 3-4 different years. So take it away, John.
So, sounds good. Pleasure to be in front of you again this year. Again, the purpose of this meeting is really just a short 10-minute, kind of an informal discussion. Spend the time to kind of look back into last summer, talk about the audit, talk about the results of the audit, really talk about a little bit of financial information as well. So just to put that in context. So with that, I will start with the independent auditor's report itself, which is
That's attached in the board.
Yep, which is really the front of the document, the main financial report. And that's really our opinion. That's the end result of the audit. So our audit firm, Clifton Larson Allen CLA, issues an opinion on the financial statements that is contained in that report. I'll talk about a few pages, but really front and center, we did issue an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion. That's what you strive for as a district each year to achieve. Really your internal controls that operate through complex internal controls that operate throughout the whole entire district that ultimately flow into financial reporting, both to your financial statements here that we're talking about and also to Department of Public Instruction, DPI, really operate every single day, right? An audit takes place once a year. It looks back on the previous year. We issue a report and an opinion on that. But really your internal control operates every single day. And the ultimate data that we audit is a product of that internal control. So again, just to make sure that you see the full circle there. Emphasis of matter each year, that there is an emphasis. We put that right in the opinion. That's on the bottom of page 1. And that's really new GASB. So you heard me, if you were here and heard me in the past talk about the various GASBs, various new standards coming down. This report here, this financial statement that you have in front of you is effective for GASB statement number 101, and that's compensated absences. So what that means or what that did is really redefined what public entities, what governments, school districts, et cetera, have to report on compensated absences liability. You had compensated absences prior to this GASB. What this did is it just simply redefined it and actually made it somewhat simpler to follow, which is always a good thing. So again, from a standpoint of the takeaways there, I won't get too technical, but ultimately, if any benefits, any compensated absences that you have for any of your employees are paid or used, that's now technically a liability. It used to be just paid, not used. So that's a little bit of an addition there. Liabilities tended to go up across municipalities and districts. Yours wasn't a significant increase, again, because you've had all of that on there and depending on your policies and so forth. So again, just wanted to point that out. That is a change in this financial statement. With the financial statements themselves, I really want to jump to page 18 of the financial statements, which is your governmental funds balance sheet. And we focus in on that a little bit because that's how you budget and that's how you report to DPI. So I usually cover those statements. And what this is a snapshot in time. This is a snapshot in time, a balance sheet as of June 30th, 2025, at the end of business on the end of your fiscal year. And it really lists all of your assets, your liabilities, and your fund balance. Again, I won't read those to you, but we'll focus in on what the carryover, what's left, which is your fund balance. So 74,199,000 is your total fund balance at the end of 2025. There's 4 components of that fund balance: non-spendable, restricted, assigned, and assigned. They are in order of restriction. So the top number is most restricted, the lowest number is least restricted. Non-spendable, exactly how it sounds. You don't have it to spend. 175,000. you'll see that that mirrors the number on the top in assets of your inventories and prepaid items. Restricted, so anything below that you have, but now there's a $677,000 restriction on that fund balance outside of the district. That's the important part of that. That happens normally. That's grants, things, legal agreements, things like that, that would have an earmarking effect on those, a restriction on those funds. Then you're left with really the district's control, and assigned fund balance of 13 million. Again, is money you've set aside for particular purposes, and that is money that's still available to you, but it's set aside for reasons that the district decides that they want to carry that money over for. Then you're left with unassigned. So we'll focus on that 60,346,000 of your $74 million fund balance is unassigned. And unassigned is really what's carried over as a reserve into the year we're in right now, the 25-26 fiscal year. And that's important to look at because, again, health of a fund balance is usually relative to the size of the district. So what we typically do, what the industry typically does, not necessarily us, but the industry typically does, is they convert that into a percentage. So you take that number, that 60 million, and divide it into your total general fund expenditures. So you have about 331 million in total expenditures for the year. So roughly that's about approximately 18% if you take that number into that. And that's an important number because, again, the cash flow of a school district, all school districts, really comes into play in the discussion. And a lot of different things, grants, property taxes come in at different times. You operate your school district every single day. So there are expenses every single day and expenditures every single day. So cash flow, if you're talking about a business, cash flow becomes a very important thing. Well, having that fund balance, having that reserve, you can fall back on at certain times of the year. And that's very, very important. And why, it takes a good percentage of fund balance to have as a carryover at the end of the year to operate like that. A lot of other districts are forced to short-term borrow at certain times of the year to make up for some of those deficits, those cash flow deficits. So again, good fund balance there. We turn to page 20. That's really, again, we talked about the point in time, the balance sheet as of June 30th. This is really the entire year. So this is your revenues and expenses, how you got to that fund balance. So again, you'll see your revenues by function, your expenditures by function, and then on page 21, kind of concluding there with net change in fund balance. So your net change in fund balance for the general fund is 3,957,000. So just short of $4 million increase, went from 70,241,000 to that 74,199,000 that we just talked about. So again, you can see how various functions and various expenditures there happen throughout the year. That's really the financial statements I wanted to talk about. I just have a simple note here about GASBs coming up. Kind of the last 3 or 4 years, you've heard me talking about GASBs, and this is going to be a quiet year. This is going to be one of the few quiet years coming up here, which I think your reaction is very appropriate. I think a lot of districts and a lot of municipalities, and including myself, are happy about that. So a little bit of a break, a little bit of a catch up. There is some stuff coming up for the year after, which isn't going to be that significant. So a little bit of a break on the very heavy lift on some of the liabilities that went into your financial statements the last 3 or 4 years. Any other questions on the audit? Any general questions? I'm happy to go through any other pages in here, any other footnotes. Majority of the document is footnotes that go through really detail of what I just talked about and the high points of those financial statements. So happy to take any questions.
Questions? Everyone okay? Alex.
Being my first go at this, what questions should I have next time I see you?
There are AI tools that you can ask to determine what you should be asking the auditor. Any?
It is a good.
Yep, taking off. It's a great question. And really the footnotes, which is kind of daunting. If you're looking at those compared to like the private sector financial statement, there's probably 10 times as many pages in here. But there's really good data in there. So there's two sections that really you should look at. And really, if there's anything in there that you don't understand or that you want more information on, ask me and I'll go through it. Because again, there's a lot of good data in there. There's summaries of your fixed assets, there's summary of your long-term debt. The other section that is really great in understanding these financial statements and helping your constituents understand these financial statements is the very front section past the opinion, which is called the management discussion and analysis. That's prepared by the district. And what it does is it takes all of that information in the financial statements and the footnotes, and it turns it into plain English language as far as a little bit easier to understand. Here's the high points, here's what happened. A little bit easier to understand, a little bit more direct as far as here's the financial information. Again, that's not an audited document, that's written by the district, but it's certainly valuable in especially sharing this data with others. So.
I would add that this is a complex document and it's a complex process that most of us don't have the background to really understand a lot of it. Been in industry a long time, and I always rely on a third party to come in and do that technical work and tell me what your opinion is. So to have an unmodified opinion is a statement of the health of our controls and that you trust the numbers on the page, and that we can as well. So, I've looked at these and I get right down to that line where you say it's an unmodified opinion, and I immediately become comfortable with what I read next, right? So that's how I treat these things.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're moving on to B, other post-employment benefits.
Yep. So what we're looking at is an annual requirement. If you recall, a few years ago, we opened up our Fund 73, or our other post-employment benefit trust fund, which is where we are trying to fund and address the liability that is out there for our emeritus benefit. So this is really essentially just a snapshot, or as of June 30th, 25, of what our financial position is, which is around $16 million. If you open that up, and then just our investment performance over the last year. So change in fiduciary net position was 7.7 million, because if you recall, a couple years ago, we were able to transfer some funds into Fund 73 strategically, because we had, of course, we had some ESSER funds that were floating around. So we used some of those to fund this account. So hopefully within 5 years hopefully 5 years as we build this up, we can address that liability and eventually take that $3.5 million off of the books that we currently have to book to pay for the emeritus benefit. So that's what we're, so the board will be voting to approve just the financial statement, because it's a requirement annually. And then also on page 2, on page 2, just tells you how these funds are invested. So we work with CISA. The PMA Financial is the group who does the investing. The board approved this a couple years ago, that we would be moderate growth, that the performance is alignment with what we had agreed to a couple years ago. The suggestion is not to change where we are right now. It's performing well. We're happy with it. And so really that's what this is. So the board is just voting to approve it and continue on with where we're invested.
James.
I did it right this time. So, you say that this includes the fund performance, and I didn't get there. Where in the document is the fund performance?
On the first page. So the funds held in the trust, the 16.3 million, so that's the balance. And then the net position changed, right, to 7.7, and then the change in interest and earnings is the 337,000. So that is the investment in earnings.
So it's just stated in dollars and not percentage for a fund like I'm used to seeing.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Mhm.
Anybody else? Okay, thanks, Angie. Next, we're going to get a referendum update from Kale.
Good evening. Before I begin, just kind of overall updates on this. I won't go through every detail in here. I will just overview. If you have any questions, please jump in at any time. Overall, as you know, we've gotten through a pretty decent cold snap in the area. So good news is while we did lose some days in construction with that, overall our schedules were not impacted. That's mainly due to some great work from our contractors, but also some good weather up front on these projects and starting early. So at this point, our schedules maintain at completion for the start of next school year and obviously into the following years for some of these projects. So we still only have one completed project at Washington. And then I'll jump right into Star Elementary. You can see we've provided some percentage updates for different phases, different trades in the project. So you can take a look at that. As you can see, as I've stated before, this building, you're seeing that building built in phases. One side of the building's already enclosed, being painted, finishes, as where another end of the building is just recently been enclosed and is still in the framing and rough-in stages. But moving along very well. And again, as you can see from the pictures, tracking very well with the finishes and pieces that you can see, really becoming a building at this point. This is taking you into the more unfinished portions of the building. As you can see, the rough-in, more center portion of the building, drywall, things like that you can see being installed. And just some additional exterior. Roofing is near complete on that building and wrapping up building envelope here shortly as well. Any questions on Star? Yeah. At Doty Elementary, and as you'll see here in a moment with Chapel, if you've been able to see those sites recently, you've really seen the buildings coming out of the ground now. Doty, as you can see, as noted up there, the steel erection for that building is essentially complete other than some minor detailing. So you'll see that building envelope and then enclose that. The gym itself, gym floor has been poured and roof is on that, as you can see in these photos here. Also some framing and things you're seeing inside that building. That's the gym floor that you see in these pictures. So as we get further into this month, you'll see that the addition that is not precast concrete, that is that steel building, you'll see that enclosed as we get further into the month. And then Chapel in a similar situation, they have multiple additions, as you're aware, at that building. Of those, 3 have started and are continuing to be coming out of the grounds with steel. I think 2 of the 3 have been complete. Yeah, sorry, I had to double check my notes. And framing already started in multiple editions. The 4th edition will not start yet this year, but will follow shortly behind. So any questions on Chapel Doty? So those are our three active sites. Okay. So as you can see here, I'll go into a quick snapshot of detail of this slide here in a second, but already 75% of our projects designed. This is very significant. Front loading this referendum, avoiding inflationary costs, unknown costs here moving forward, other factors outside of our control. Here's the actual work complete. That number is going to continue to rise rapidly as we bring more projects online. And then you can also see here with our contingency, I didn't note early on, we continue to be pleasantly surprised with the amount of change orders and the fact that we're not seeing many. The most significant unforeseen was an issue with some sewer at Chapel Elementary, having to divert that. But all things considered, it was very minimal. So again, you can just see by the numbers here, it's been very favorable. So here it lays out from that sheet before why we've or how we have gotten to this point with that 75% design. The one completed project that you saw, we have the three active construction sites. Beaumont has been bid and will be breaking ground this spring. Lincoln is currently in the bid phase. That opens up next week, or sorry, opens up on the 12th this week. Lost track of days. So that's will also break ground before school is out. So that is also ready for fall of next school year. NEW School of Innovation bids through NWTC on 2/24. So that's coming up and will be complete for the fall school year as well. And then finally, the projects in current design phase are Red Smith, Edison, Lombardi. And Nexus continues to do some work with our students, interviewing them. I believe Elmore is due next that they're scheduling to do a student interview. I think that's all I have, or this isn't working. Any other questions?
Anybody? You know, I love your updates, Kale. Thank you. Next, we're going to talk about school security drill review.
Thank you. It's been shared with the board. This is our annual presentation to the board. It's kept confidential for security reasons. Please let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you. And finally, budget update.
Okay, Angie's going to join me for this and we'll go ahead and pull up a slide deck for you. Also in board docs, you will find a memo that we will cover tonight. You just officially approved my retirement earlier in the board meeting. And I wanted to share with you, one of my goals had always been to present to the district a better budget. And we haven't been able to do that. We've done some really hard work, which we'll talk about in a little while, but due to a lot of factors that are out of our hands, and quite frankly, we'll be honest about that tonight. We've been honest about the reason we're in this situation. And yeah, then we're going to open it up to a discussion with the board. After some really hard work in this past month of having retreats and talking about, my goodness, where else can we possibly cut? We've been able to generate a list that we're going to share and talk about opportunity for community input and next steps for us as a district. So with that, Angie, I think you're in control. If you could. Yeah. So our circumstance hasn't changed much, as I just alluded to. When I first came to sit at this table,
We were in dire straits. We were facing a $36 million deficit at that time. And as I look back at news clips from back in that period of time, nothing really has changed. If you could click one more time, Angie. 71% of Wisconsin public schools this year will be receiving less state aid than we did last year. 71%, that's 301 school districts out of a total of 421 districts in the state of Wisconsin. We are one of them. So when we look at the factors that put us in a position where we are financially not in a great spot, this is a major factor in that. The shortfall, which Angie will talk about, is put on the back of our local property taxpayers. And even with that, we face a deficit. Mm-hmm.
So, a vast majority of revenues for Green Bay School District and for other districts across the state is derived from the revenue limit formula, which is made up of property taxes and a state aid. So 84% of our revenues come from property taxes and state aid. Really what this is, right, the revenue limit formula is really the backbone of school finance in Wisconsin. This is what this is kind of how we operate. So student enrollment, like we've talked about, is important, right? It's a major factor in this revenue limit formula, and how much we are actually, taxing our community or property taxes. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So in the current biennial state budget, we got the $325 per pupil increase in the revenue limit. But to Vicky's point, what the state legislature didn't do this state biennial budget is put any more money into the state aid bucket. So what that means is that any increase in the revenue limit or the revenue limit authority has to be offset by property taxes, because we didn't receive any more equalized aid. And just as a side note, if you hear from the state saying that they put a lot more money or gave a lot more money to school districts because they put more into state aid, that doesn't mean we have more money to spend in the classroom. It's essentially property tax relief, and we did not see that in this current state budget. So by not putting more money into that state aid bucket, our property tax levy increased by 5%. That's what we experienced in Green Bay School District, and that's the reason why, because we didn't see that offset in this state biennium budget. I talked a little bit about our student enrollment. The reason why declining enrollment, which the state and the nation is facing, declining enrollment is important, because that's how we derive the revenue limit authority. So what we can raise in revenues. So we take the 11,650, which is what we have currently, and then we multiply that by the number of students, or FTE is what we call it for revenue limit purposes, and that's how much revenue we get. So as our enrollment declines, the revenues coming into the district also decline. The tool that is offered through the state, the tool that is offered to districts is to go out to operational referendums and capital referendums to exceed that revenue limit authority. That's the only way that we can exceed the revenue limit authority, or go above and beyond whatever that formula comes out to be.
Chanel, when were you born?
2007.
I think if I looked back to where we ranked as a state in 2007, we were probably still pretty good. There was a period of time, Chanel, in this state where Wisconsin was in the top 10 of funding for public schools. Last year actually, we were ranked 26th. And if we dug in a little bit deeper and just looked at the Midwest, how we're doing, we used to be number one in the Midwest, out of Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa. Today we're fourth. And if you look at where Wisconsin is listed on here, folks, The 14,882 is an average. Green Bay Area Public School District is at 11,650. So we're below the average. You notice Iowa isn't even on, I didn't list Iowa on here. Thank goodness Iowa isn't doing well, because that's why we have David Johns. So thank you, Iowa. Go for it.
Okay, so could you go back to that past slide? Okay, so what was that, like 2009 they stopped giving us money that we hadn't. So could you go to the slide prior? I think my question was on that, because now I've gotten distracted by, okay, revenue limits there. So legislature, Madison is talking about giving tax relief, property tax relief to the taxpayers. And I just want to point out that, so that's going to increase the green part of the glass, but they're just talking about giving tax relief to the property owners. That is not going to increase the amount of money. I just want people to understand that that's not going to give more money to the schools. That's just going to maybe put some money into taxpayer pockets if they agree to this. And who knows if they're going to agree to it or not. But could you explain how we got to that 11,650 instead of the 14,000, so that people understand why we're not at 14,000?
So back in the early 90s, 1993, I was alive. So back in 1993, the state legislature, that was when revenue limits were put into place. So if you were a conservative spending district, not a high spending district, then you got locked into wherever you landed. So if you were conservative spending, you got locked in at that conservative level. If you were a high spender, you got locked in at a higher level, and that's how we've remained. So we're a low revenue limit, right, or a low revenue ceiling district. So that's that 11,000, right? So we're the lowest of a lot of the districts. So we were locked in, and then I'll talk a little bit more about inflationary increases and things like that. But that is why we are at the lower end. Is that helpful? Does that answer your question? Okay. Any more questions up to this point? Okay. Okay, so although so we talked about the 325 per pupil increase that we get for the next 2 years. So that equates to the 650 for the next 2 years. The flat rate, the 325, although it's helpful, we did receive some extra additional revenue, right, for this year and for next year. The flat amount isn't addressing the inflationary increases. So we talked about the revenue limit, revenue limits that were put into place. But back in 2009-10, that is when, during the Great Recession, that is when they stopped giving the inflationary adjustment to that per pupil. So once that stopped, we never did catch up with inflation. So we've been behind, the state funding has been behind, hasn't kept up with inflation. So as you can imagine, right, as we see all of our expenditures increasing, that's why we are continuing to see the structural deficit, right, is we're not getting as much revenue, the state's not keeping up with inflation, but salaries, benefits, right, health insurance, vendor contracts, transportation, the list goes on and on. Those continue to increase, but our revenues coming in aren't keeping pace with that. So that's hence why we're here. So this graph is really just showing the differential of what we would have received had we received an inflationary increase. So we're short about, I think it's $192 per pupil, which would equate to, $3.5–4 million, which would be helpful. It's not huge, but think of if we would have been receiving inflationary increases since 2009-10, right? So just a little bit of a tidbit there. Any questions on this graph?
Okay, and as we know, another factor that leads to our circumstance is that, as Angie has mentioned, enrollment is declining. Thank you. If you want to hit one more time. Thanks. There are a couple of reasons that enrollment is declining. One, obviously, that we hear about a lot is the aging population having fewer kids. Private school choice program expansion, which not every state has adopted, but Wisconsin has. Homeschooling during the pandemic, there were a number of families that when we shifted to off campus, they chose to remain off campus. And then one that isn't talked about a lot, but it's impacting districts such as ours, pronounced drop in number of new immigrants. And I think nationwide, we're going to see quite a bit of that moving forward. Could you just click once on the next slide, please? Yeah, I want to pause and talk about this slide for a second. On January 26th, after the board meeting, I did an interview with Fox 11, and it was about budget, and they asked me to respond to this chart that I'd never seen before. And they said that this was a chart that was being used by GOP lawmakers to justify not increasing funding to public schools. Now, I'd never seen the chart before. So my response at that time was, yes, I've never seen this chart before. I'd like to look a little further, but why wouldn't we? The question was, why are we adding more staff during a period of time where enrollment is decreasing? My response at the time was, why wouldn't we? Because the staff are literally what education is all about. But I did want to dig into this graph a little bit more. So what you're looking at, board, the top part of the chart is employee, public school employees in the state of Wisconsin. And you see it headed up. And then this dramatic difference between that and the blue line, which is student enrollment. Now, if I were an average taxpayer and I'm watching the news and I see this graph, I would be shocked by a story of public schools continuing to increase their FTE, their number of employees. At the same time, there's this dramatic drop in enrollment. So I went to the site where this chart came from and started doing some digging. Everybody in this room probably went to college, including you, currently enrolled. So you know you can make numbers look different. There's always a purpose behind what's being presented. So if you can do one click, please. Same numbers. The blue line is now at the top. That's the number of students enrolled in the state of Wisconsin, at least according to this data. The bottom line at the bottom is the red line of employees that they said public schools have the number of employees over the last 8 years. So 2016 to 2024, 25. Same numbers, still showing an increase. Can you click once more, please? So I dug in a little bit on the data and I saw that the number of student enrollment started to decrease in March of 2020. Geez, what happened? COVID, okay? Enrollment for students started to decline. Then about 6 months later, staffing started to increase, not only in Wisconsin, but across the country. Why? ESSER funds. The Trump administration in December of 2020, he signed off on funds going to public schools to support the schools during COVID. Why wouldn't we add staff? Why wouldn't we have added staff? But now I'm curious about those numbers. So can you click one more time, please? The data showed that between the year 16, 17 and 24, 25, 4,232, am I reading that right? More employees were working in our public schools during an 8-year period of time, more than 4,000, 4,200. Then I dug in a little bit further. Where did they get that number from? And what the data showed was that they were getting the number from 465 school districts in the state of Wisconsin. What's the problem with that? We don't have that many. There are 421 school districts in the state of Wisconsin. Then I dug in a little bit deeper. What schools were they looking at? And the total number of schools that they counted were 2,421 to get that number. And we don't have more than 2,290. So let's just assume that public schools in the state of Wisconsin added 4,232 more employees in 8 years, which would be awesome, by the way. That would amount to an FTE of 1.74 per school. That doesn't sound exorbitant. In fact, during that period of time, I can tell you, student needs have increased dramatically. Wouldn't we want to add employees? But if you can click it one more time. One more, please. Our district, just like I would assume many other public school districts in the state of Wisconsin, have actually decreased our FTE. And this is just a snapshot of our district over the last 3 years, 4 years. So as our student enrollment has decreased, so has our staffing. So I share this with you because I was very frustrated of not having a comeback at the time when I was asked about this. I wish we had the funds to increase our staff. I do, because we have the needs, but we aren't. And if that's a talking point that you're hearing, you need to understand that it's just not true. Okay, thank you for allowing me to get that off my chest.
Okay, so I'm just gonna, I can't talk and click at the same time, so that's why it's all up here. So as we know, school districts are mandated by state and federal law to meet the needs of students with disabilities, and the funding, obviously the funding has not come close to, right, to meeting the needs and the increased costs that is required by school districts to cover. The Special Education Fund, or Fund 27, budget for Green Bay is about 59 million. And of that 59 million in revenues and expenditures, because it balances, it right, 59 million in expenditures needs to balance and cover the expenditures of the fund. Over $30 million is transferred from our Fund 10, or operational fund, to cover the costs that aren't reimbursed by the state. If you recall, for the 25-27 state biennial budget, the state promised a 42% reimbursement for this current year in 25-26. Because historically, we had budgeted 39%. The reason why we budgeted 39% is because historically, when the state budget said we would receive a certain amount or percentage, we always fell short and received about 3% to 4% less than what they had promised. So we did conservatively, set aside 39%. And then, right, it was recently announced that we would only be receiving about 35%. So the impact for us in Green Bay is about a $1.5 million to $2 million loss, additional loss of revenue, because we have only 30, right, we budgeted more, the 39% than the 35%. Of course, this is an estimate. So, right, I feel like, optimistic, right? You know me, I'm generally not optimistic, but I do feel like, and what we've kind of been hearing is that 35% is low, that we may receive a couple more percentages or a little bit more in revenue. It's just that they don't want to get to the end of the year and have overpaid and then cause school districts to have to, right, pay back funds. So we may see an increase. So right now, it's really unknown, because I'm pretty positive we won't find out until June. So we wait. But that's kind of the reality, the curveball that was thrown into, right, a 25-26 budget. That was a first experience for me, because generally you kind of know what you're at least getting into, but so that was new. Any questions on this? Mm-hmm.
Not really a question, more of a comment of an email I received today at like 2:30 from WASB. An update on they're estimating that the budget surplus at the end of fiscal year 2027 will be 2.3 billion. Not that 1 point something billion they were initially predicting, 2.3 billion. Governor Evers and Speaker Voss are talking about using the surplus to address the property tax burden, which we already discussed, that's not going to give more money to the schools. And they are asking, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again. We need to fix special education to some sufficient, because that's why we have a drop, because it's some certain. And I know that's all really confusing. And I'm hoping some people who are watching and listening will reach out to their legislators, their senator, the governor, and say, we need to fix this, because whether we get 39% or 35%, it still isn't the 42% we were promised, and 42% still doesn't take care of our needs for special education. So I will repeat again, the estimate from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau has been updated to 2.3 billion, billion. And so that's a heck of a lot of money. And they already have some billions in the rainy day fund that is being added to. So I think that brings that rainy day fund up to close to 6 billion. So yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about the funding formula and the per pupil payments. So as we've discussed, school districts across the state received $325 for the next 2 years, which equated to about $650 per pupil on the revenue limit. The independent charter schools, the non-district charter schools, because we have charter schools, so I want to make sure that that's very different than what we're talking about here. So the total state cost of voucher and non-district charter schools that were set aside in the 25-27 state biennial budget was $1.8 billion. The district currently levies about 14 million in private school vouchers, and also expenses about $1.1 million for the independent charter school that exists within our area. So as you can see from the graph, although GBAP students and school districts across the state receive $650, the 2-year per pupil increase for these independent charter schools and for the vouchers was $1,068. So we have kind of talked about that before. We've seen charts where we saw a big jump in the voucher number that we were expensing. That happened actually a few years ago. The reason wasn't because our number of vouchers increased drastically. It was because these per pupil payments have increased drastically over the past few years. So this isn't the first year that we've seen a large increase in these per pupil payments. We also saw a large increase in the last state budget.
James?
If you go back to slide. So some might insist or comment that, well, maybe the independent charter and choice schools actually receive less and this is them catching up to us. Can you speak to what they receive per pupil versus what we receive? Because we know what ours is, 11,650, but it's my understanding that at the high school level, already before this went into effect, they receive more than us per pupil anyways, and they are accelerating at a larger rate. Is that a correct set of facts?
Yeah, I have to find the budget document because in the memo. You should see the tabs on top of my, looks like Mike Freeze's, only probably worse.
Nothing looks as bad as Mike Freeze's. Independent charter schools for 2025. Students received 11,729 compared to GBAPS 11,325. So you are correct. And it just increases dramatically up to 27.
We need to get this out in the news media. People need to know that this is happening. News media.
So let's talk about what you just said. There's some uncertainty at the federal level and at the state level. We already know that there's a budget surplus. It looks like these numbers change a little bit, but originally the state was looking at about a $4 billion surplus. And then recently we learned it was an additional 1.5, and now you are saying an additional 2.3. So if you can click one more time, Angie. The key takeaway from my perspective is that the resources exist to support public education. It's really just a decision that's being made in Madison by the people that represent us. At the federal level, there's some uncertainty that has continued from last year. If you recall, title funds had been withheld and we didn't find out until July that they were actually going to be released. But Angie has to plan for that because that type of uncertainty can happen at any time. The significant risk is continued uncertainty regarding the dismantling of the Department of Education and where are those funds going to go. And if the funds are put in different departments at the federal level, how will we access those funds? So we hope to get more information about that moving forward. So to summarize, the factors that are leading to the structural deficit, we've got inadequate public school funding, declining enrollment, reduction to special education funding, and we won't get into this tonight, but as you know, unfunded or underfunded mandates that are put on public schools. Oftentimes when bills come through, the expectation falls only on public schools, and the private schools do not have to follow those mandates.
Okay, so let's look at just an overview of 25, 26, our position. So we approved a budget back in October, or the board approved a budget back in October, and that had a $3.5 million deficit. So going into plan was to reach into fund balance a little bit in the tune of about $3.5 million. But then, right, we just received a message a couple months ago that we may not get what we had anticipated in our special education reimbursement. So we are adding to that original deficit by about $1.5 to $2 million because of the funding that we may not receive for special education. So what does that equal? The estimated deficit right now stands at about 5 to 5.5 million. Again, an estimate, because as we work through, right, we have been doing a lot, right, as a team to try to reduce how much we need to reach into fund balance. So, we're working towards, trying to balance that budget as much as we possibly can strategically. So, right, we will continue to give you updates as we go, but this is the estimated deficit because of the things that have happened in the last couple months. So now confronting a structural deficit. Well, we've been talking about this for quite some time. As you know, because of the ESSER funds, we were able to kind of prolong this conversation, to now, right? We've talked about it. We knew it was coming. And fortunately, we had ESSER funds to kind of create a kind of a cushion for us for 3 years to plan to where we knew we were headed. So like we said, 25, 26, here is our current reality for our structural deficit as of today. So between that $3.5 to $5.5 million deficit. In 26, 27, we have a balanced budget, but you see a range here. The range is because If we were to give steps and CPI, we would be around that $8 million deficit. So right now we are balanced with reduction in FTE. We consolidated 3 more schools. We've done a lot of work on that end, so we're balanced, but it does not include at this point a CPI increase or steps. The 2027 new state budget. So we also in between here have a state budget that's coming, but what we need to start focusing on is not only next year's structural deficit, the deficit that we're facing, but we have to start talking about 27, 28. 27, 28 is the year that our $16.5 million operational referendum falls off. So in addition to whatever we decide to do today, which will affect next year, it will also affect that first year of an ask to the community for the operational referendum. So just depending on what happens and what, and as we work through, I think it's really important to know that we're sitting on, at February 9th, right? So we still have a lot of time to figure out where staffing lands. We just finished up staffing. We have a significant reduction in staffing through attrition, right? The team has done amazing work as far as that goes with the consolidation and really the opportunity to save some money for the district moving forward. So once all of these things kind of shake into place, this number is going to fluctuate and we are going to be able to, right? We're going to be able to move towards what are we really looking at? But right now, we're balanced, and then and there's whatever is decided, then we go into an $8 million deficit. So I think whatever is reduced or cut now is going to affect the next 2 years and then the years after that, because we'll be asking for an operational referendum, which will stretch, for a few years. We're uncertain of how many years.
Yeah, I guess so. Okay, so let's talk about our progress so far in addressing the deficits over the last 2 years. We've consolidated schools over the years, including at the end of this year. There will be a closure of 7 schools. I said to the team earlier today, I think that might be the most for a district in the state of Wisconsin. I can't say that with certainty, but it certainly is for the largest school districts. So I assume it's right. We've postponed non-essential purchases, including instructional materials. We ended software contracts, managed staff levels through attrition, and revised methodologies. We made changes to employee benefit plans. We implemented district-wide department budget reductions 2 years in a row. This will be the 3rd year. And we passed a 2024 referendum, which is focused on consolidation and energy efficiency. So long-term, this will be a savings for the district.
So actually, John kind of touched on fund balance, but I just thought it was important. Fund balance always comes up. So I thought it was important to touch base on the importance of fund balance and why it's important to have a strong fund balance, which we have really worked on since I've been here over the last 12 years. So fund balance is essentially the district's net financial resources. So it's your assets or what you own minus what you owe or your liabilities. And that really is the snapshot of our financial position at a certain point of time, not to be confused with a savings account. That's often a term that people kind of interchangeably say with fund balance. Fund balance is not all cash, right? It's other things. Cash is included in our assets, but that is not all that what fund balance is. So the district has the policy. We have a minimum fund balance of 15%. As John discussed tonight, we are at about 18%. So it's not as if we have an excessive amount of money sitting in that fund balance. We have a strong, it's healthy, but I think it's just important to note, that it's about 18%, and a healthy reserve or a healthy fund balance you know, some of the things that John had mentioned and what I've mentioned in the past, we no longer have to short-term cash borrow for, you know, for when we have cash flow that's low. There are certain points of the way that we're funded by the state, right? We have points in our calendar where we don't have a lot of cash, but because you have a strong fund balance, we no longer have to short-term cash borrow and pay interest on those borrowings. And it also is a safety net for the emergencies, right, that come up. So it's good to have a strong fund balance, long-term financial planning, right? And it also demonstrates our fiscal responsibility as a school district to our community members. We have a AA2, that's in big letters. We have a very favorable rating by Moody's. So we get rated when we go out for debt. So when we go out for capital referendum and we have to borrow, a favorable rating saves millions of dollars on interest expense because we get to borrow at a good interest rate. So so that's why that AA2 is up there. So using fund balance to cover deficit. So it is definitely a tool for, you know, strategic. It can be used occasionally. We just don't want to consistently use our fund balance to close structural deficit or ongoing expenditures, recurring expenditures, salaries, benefits, things that increase with time. So a one time occasionally, but definitely you don't want this to be, right? You just don't want this to be your plan to close gaps all of the time. So really the responsible path, kind of a very simple graph, but just shows, right? We need our expenditures to come in line with our revenues for balanced budgets. And that's always the goal of the district, so.
Okay, so the challenge ahead of us, navigating a perfect storm, inflation, underfunding, policy shifts. Our commitment is to protect the core educational mission of the district and our bond rating. And the action, we need to make deliberate, difficult choices to address our long-term structural deficit. And note on the bottom, the choices we make now are going to define the strength and the stability of our district for years to come. So this is what we're looking at. Angie, if you could. Balanced budget right now. If we were to add CPI, which is 2.63%, and steps, it would move the deficit to about 8 million, which means we believe we need to look at additional measures to reduce. I want to talk about what we've done so far and next step. Over the last 2 months, we've held some budget retreats. We had administrators, managers, teachers, support staff, operations, facilities. And at the retreats, we gave them a look at what we just shared with you and then asked the groups to come up with recommendations. They did this 3 years ago when we were facing the $36 million deficit. I really am grateful for the folks that joined us. I was impressed with the things that they offered up, knowing that the people sitting in the room were going to be impacted directly by some of the cuts that they were recommending. They were very student-centered in their discussions. So board, I think you would be very proud of those folks. After they gave us their ideas, we vetted them. We used the same criteria that we did 3 years ago. We tiered them. Tier 1 are the mandated by state or federal government. Tier 2 are those ideas that closely align with our mission, vision, and strategic priorities. Tier 3 were the enhancers, so things that were nice and made our district better, or the experience for our children better, or our staff better. And Tier 4 were the ones that had little to no negative impact on student or staff. So we vetted, and board, I shared with you a hard copy. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Kinsey, not yet though, but to pull it up so we can just talk about it, begin discussion. The next step for us after tonight is to present this to the community. We're going to be out in the community next Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday at East High School at 6 p.m., Wednesday at Southwest High School at 6 p.m. We're going to present this to the community. We're going to present the list of ideas, and we're going to seek feedback that we can bring back to the Board of Education for further discussion. We aren't asking for any action right now, board, but we are interested in your thoughts and any direction that you might want to provide. Again, no expectation for that tonight, but if you want to begin the discussion on that, please do. If you can click it one more. These are the general, for audience members, these are general topics you can keep going through that came up. Transportation is always brought up. Technology, revisiting the elementary one-to-one laptops. Staffing continuing to reduce through attrition and retirement. Looking at our comprehensive programs, and as Mr. Becker appropriately said to me the other day, these are the things that really make us who we are. And regretfully, we need to take a look at some of those. Operations, so vendor management, health benefit package, and for special events, are there non-instructional events that we're currently doing that maybe we need to take a look at? And as Lynn Gerlach often says, are there other resources maybe we could be using for some of those events? So Kinsey, if you can pull up that doc. And audience members, we will be posting this document to board docs shortly.
I'm just wondering if there are going to be any other community events other than the 2 next week.
The board is encouraged to have as many as you would like.
James?
Superintendent Byer, you started this by saying we're balanced budget now, and I just want to make sure that I understand. I saw on a slide before that we're balanced going into next year, but currently we have a fluctuating situation where we are not necessarily balanced for current year. We're up to $5 million depending on where stuff comes in. So what we're talking about now is that will play out. Like we've made decisions last year this time, and we kept the programming in place, whatever, and we made the decision last year this time that any misalignment would come out of fund balance, and that's still the plan. So I just want to make sure that we all understand that we've bypassed this year, and it will fall where it falls, and now we're talking about next year where we are balanced if we cut steps, cuts CPI. Okay, thank you.
So on this, I'll just summarize what you're looking at. In column 1, it's a field, so it's been categorized depending on what the item is. Column 2 is the specific item that was mentioned in at least one of the retreats. Column 3 is the estimated savings. We put estimated because there might be some fluctuation in the final savings. Column 4 are some notes from the team for the board to review. Column 5, authority, which ones the board would have to make a vote on before we could implement, or if it's something the district can do. Column 6 are the tiers that I had mentioned. Again, tier 4, we have none left that I'm aware of. And tiers 1 and 2, we did not place on here because they either directly impact our work that we do or they're mandated by law. In column 7, some of these are already in progress. The district authority ones are in progress. Okay, so now we turn it over to the board for discussion.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? Andrew?
Thank you. I appreciate the report. So there's a couple of things. First of all, whether it's this year with an election coming up that we'll have half of the state senate up for election in new districts, whether it's in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, the state budget will not keep ballooning a surplus before eventually both parties will say, wait a minute, because they'll be hearing too much about it from the public. Yeah, I wish they'd distribute that out to the schools with at least some of it able to be used in the classroom for this year, and they didn't. I wish they would tomorrow for next year, and they won't. But there will be elections, and there will not continue to be billions of dollars of surplus ballooning. So while I think we need to be aware of worst case scenarios, that is not going to be held away from us and balloon forever. When we talk about what won't make the things that, over many years, the things that we've done to make this district, and talk about using our size to be something different and special, though that's not just luxuries. That is hanging on to students. That's bringing in some students, not as many as I'd like. It's not a huge amount, but it's some, and that offsets declining enrollment. And to throw those things away, it's going to make it even worse if we do those. I'm a little concerned that we even opened a conversation of a complete staff freeze of no steps, and no CPI. That is a type of austerity measure that the sky would have to be absolutely falling for that, and I don't think that should even be on the table. Our staff, the reason we're keeping staff is because we got our wages and benefits back to where we needed to be, because we became the first district to be 50,000 base. So while I do think we need to be aware, we can't be destroying things that will cost us hundreds of students. Okay. John Dewey going into a school will kill that program or mortally wound it. Okay. There are people who go to John Dewey, some just for program-based learning and would do it anywhere, but that is something that reaches kids that, in many cases, reaches kids that we weren't reaching elsewhere and would go elsewhere. So your savings is gone when you do that, and it is not the same when you combine it into a building. We made cuts to buildings. We decided not to do it to Dewey. We decided not to consolidate secondary schools. We've made those decisions, and we should live within those. Two more things. People think that I'm crazy about fund balance, think I want to run it down to zero or something. I don't, but realistically, AA2 versus AA3 it's a tiny move. It's right. It's 0.05 to 0.1 probably tops. You don't want to go another step down into the A1 if you don't have to. But again, the things on this list are mostly terrible with real deep student and staff impact. Closing the pool where we just remodeled on one of them, I think is terrible. And I don't think we're going to need to do all this, but we might have to be less conservative with fund balance and find out what could we do that is not going to take us too far down. And I think the reality is, as the presenters have stated, is an operational referendum is necessary. Now, if an operational referendum failed, okay, then sure, then I'm open to the conversation that would be forced to happen at that point. But we haven't decided on operational referendum yet. The billions are not going to stay in the state budget forever. And I don't want to rush to decisions that will hurt kids and make families leave. So that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
James?
It is on this point where Andrew and I probably most disagree, just from a planning perspective, because he's probably correct when it comes to the the landscape of our legislature over the course of the next, because everything swings back and forth, right? I don't know that that is stable enough for us to do our fiscal and our fiduciary responsibility to making sure that this district survives critical times, right? So last year, we were presented with a bunch of executive order, which in the event they actually took place, would have really stressed our fund balance because we would be lacking certain funds for periods of times that we would have to endure. So I don't think that I think Andrew is legitimate. He doesn't want to run it to zero, but I do think that we have a fiscal responsibility to take hard decisions to make sure that we don't violate our own policy. And that's 15%, right? And when we look at that, I don't think that it is opening a set of conversations in the event that we fail an operational referendum. I think that is a catastrophic event and no one wants to be there. And in the event that we do that and we look back and said, we failed to take the necessary steps to make sure that we have a survivability for this stuff, is something that I don't typically introduce into fiscal planning. We made a decision last year to go into deficit spend, and my position is I won't do that again because we are not being fiscally responsible if we knowingly go into deficit spend structurally, because every time we give increases is compounding, right? It doesn't go away. And I do not want to not pay our teachers funds, but if we're going to say there are non-starters in here, then it is on us to find that money and not punt and kick it down the road for someone else to find. Because in the event that the legislature turns over, but we get a governor of the other party, we're stuck, right? We're stuck for another 4 years because it's going to be a situation where we don't get the necessary increases or the prescribed increases. So I'm personally going to look at this year and fight hard for fiscal responsibility and make sure that the taxpayers that we have to go to in November know that we're not putting more on them because we don't want to make hard decisions. And I know that some of those decisions may change some of the services that we provide. And I would hate to make those decisions, but I'm not going to take it off the table just because it is the nature and what Green Bay looks like now. We have to think about what Green Bay looks like in the context of fiscal reality into the future.
Jeanette.
So I'm not sure where I stand on that right now. I don't want to decrease our teachers' pay, but we may have to look at some hard things. I agree. But what I want to say here is I am seeing some things here that are interesting. Selling naming rights to our stadiums. I mean, we don't do that. How much money is that going to bring in? Well, even if it brings in, I don't know, how much do you sell naming rights for? $100,000? I don't know. Increasing facility rental fees, all those little things. I'm really glad that they came up with some of these little things. But we need to continue to, I'd hate to see anything happen with JDOL or with NEW, because those schools, I agree with Andrew, they provide a alternative for kids who can't function well, or maybe that's not a fair word, that do much better, that learn in different ways. And so those programs need to continue to exist. And, the fact that we have a transportation issue now with that, but having the discussion and continuing to have open discussion and not putting walls up, that perhaps there are some other inventive ways that we can figure out to take care of this problem, and continue to talk to your legislators, all of them, because Andrew's right, things are going to change. And you're right, James, we could have a Republican governor, but we need to get the people behind this so that they realize the value of public schools. Because without public schools, their property values are going to plunge eventually. It will happen.
I'll just be very blunt. Our education budgets for public education in Wisconsin for the last 14 years have been absolutely horrible. Um, I mean, that's the nicest thing I could possibly say about them. And the fact of the matter is, I hate to say it, but 7 budget cycles and we've been dealing with the same situation. So I think there's a chance the law of averages, so to speak, means at some point something's going to change. But I don't see a sign. It's been 7 budgets that it hasn't. And we've had billions of dollars surplus in every single one of those budgets, upwards of 7 billion, I believe, 2 or 3 budget cycles ago. And I don't care who the governor is, because that doesn't matter. They don't control everything or anything sometimes. So I have very mixed feelings on that. Now, going back to fund balance, same thing. We need that because who knows what's going to happen with Title I funding next year, et cetera. That being said, if my math is correct, we still have $10 million we could take from that and still be at 15%. So I think we do have the ability to be a little bit more liberal with that, especially if you factor in the $8 million that equates to taking care of staff next year. So I think for next year, I would likely not feel the need to rush on a lot of these things on this paper, especially considering the relatively low dollar amounts, yet significant impact some of them could have due to fund balance. Um, you know, but I want to make one point clear to the public. We've been under an operation referendum of $16.5 million for 10 years. Okay. And that expires. We have to, as a community, if you don't want to see catastrophic cuts in the future, regardless of what happens at the state or national level, we have to continue to support our schools. And an operational referendum is going to be necessary no matter what. And and we'll need to, and obviously we need to do more communication, and that process is starting. But maintaining at least that equivalent $16.5 million number, which obviously a 10-year later, 26, 27 terms is not 16 and a half, it's much larger. The good thing is because of our rating, our management, our reductions, et cetera, public, we have the ability to continue an operation referendum to avoid all of this stuff without, I believe, Angie, without any increase in taxes to the public in all likelihood. So that is something that we can hopefully look forward to and hopefully look forward to support on. But at the end of the day, the number one thing I'm always going to make my decisions on is going to be based on what matters the most to kids in front of kids on a daily, hourly basis. And that is where I'm going to put all of our resources, and I will plan on taking more from elsewhere first before I ever take from that. So.
Go ahead, Sam.
I appreciate the list coming forward. There's a lot of really disturbing items on here, if I'm just being honest. After hearing a strategic plan update earlier in this meeting, even thinking about things for students so that they are in a thriving student body and we have a thriving workforce between our strategic plan goals and the portrait of a graduate, which is how we've completely oriented everything that we do in this district. Several of these items are really alarming. And so I think the broader impact of things on this list, I'm just thinking about really, really, really adhering to class size and, sticking with all of our staffing and trying to reduce staffing through attrition and those things. I think that, that our community, our families, our parents need to understand that means your class sizes will be maxed out. Yes, we just had a board policy update regarding class sizes. And I think that the reality of that is, the days of a 15-person class are going to be gone. And that means that, our elementary students are maxed out in their classrooms. Our secondary students are maxed out in their classrooms. And I just look, additionally at some of these elements here that again go into thriving student body, thriving workforce. Specifically, I'm interested to get more information about some of the additional programming. But when we start talking about evaluating potential for the IB pathway, the fine arts pathway, the AVID programming, increasing any of our outreach or any of the things for career and technical education, those are the programs that are critical within our district that offer our students the experiences they, number one, need to be prepared for the future workforce, and number two, prepare them to be ready for whatever after high school looks like. So everything we just heard in our strategic plan update about preparing for what life after high school looks like, those are all things on this list right now, and so that's really disturbing to me. And so, I'm with Alex, I'm gonna tend to lean towards making sure that the cuts to what our students are experiencing are absolutely minimized. And I just think that's ultimately at the end of the day, I'm really kind of disgusted to be having to have this conversation when money is being hoarded in the Capitol. So that's all I've got.
Anybody else? Lynn?
I have just two very basic questions, please. Do I understand correctly that we are going to get this electronically soon? And that we have time to read this over and study it? We're going to be discussing it in a couple weeks. Am I right? No?
Thank you for that tee up. As Angie mentioned, we don't have the final numbers yet. This is not even a starting point for us. This is a mid-school year where we wanted to provide you with where we're at currently at this moment in time. We will have another update April, May-ish when we have a better idea of the special education reimbursement. But we would entertain any discussion the board wants regarding things that maybe you would like us to pursue right now as we get closer to the 26, making decisions about 26, 27. So if you see something on that list, or maybe you have your own ideas, we would entertain digging further into something that you think we should. That sound okay, Angie?
Yeah. Go ahead, Lynn.
So do I understand that we are doing this right now, or there is no time for us to see it in a more readable version and talk about it? What's the plan with this? And then I have a second question after I get that answer.
So we will, the next step for us is to bring this to the community next week. And we're going to get feedback from them, and then we'll bring that back to the board. So at least you have a feel for what the community is thinking as well. And Alex mentioned this, I can't remember who else might have. We have to go to referendum in November, and we are working behind the scenes right now on what that can look like and presenting it to the board. There's a poll going on right now. We're going to share the results with you hopefully next month so that we can begin those discussions. What you're looking on this list, yeah, it's very disturbing, Sam. I'm right there with you. We want to be open and honest with the public and with the Board of Education that if the funding doesn't change and if a referendum doesn't pass, these are some things we truly have to consider. And I don't want you to first see a list like this in December after potentially a failed referendum. We need to start thinking about it today.
And my other question, can anyone tell me at what percentage of capacity West High School is operating at this time?
I have two things. I don't know if this helps, and I think it's safe to give a close estimate, but because we just had a conversation at the long ago, I don't think it's far off from 50%, remember correctly. And then just to clarify what Lynn said, and so some of these ideas and how we feel about pursuing some of these, you want us to have that kind of cemented for next meeting? Or you ready now, things like that, and just want to be clear in how you want, and maybe an overall timeframe, how you want that communicated, with like the level of strength, or so to speak, of how we want that.
if you would prefer, when we bring community feedback to the board, which will be at what month are we in, February? At the March work session. Could we plan for that?
Yeah, so during the planning meeting this morning, we had that conversation, and it did seem like March would be the time we would have our next conversation for decisioning some of these items in that April timeframe and May timeframe. That's kind of the cycle that we went through last year. Now, I just don't know how the work that we're doing to shape the referendum question modifies that timeline, but we have time to work that out.
Andrew.
Okay, so West is not only 50% used of any kind of meaningful capacity. You cannot double the students that are in West right now and have it work as it exists right now and as it exists in 2026 and how we do things. We had this battle about West. We put referendum money into West. We remodeled West significantly, making it modernizing it for school and community with the referendum, with the stadium, and auditorium. Yeah, auditorium and the stadium both can have community purposes. You would. I'm not kidding. You would have to cut the chains off of it and arrest me if you try to close West, and I'm not going to be the only one.
Lynn.
I just want to clarify that I wasn't suggesting closing West. I was just asking a question about capacity.
Okay. I guess I'll chime in here briefly. This is crushing. And there's a direct line between this and the slide deck we saw tonight and the negligence of our state legislature. There's no other way to talk about it. And each year it just gets worse. And each year we tighten our belt and depend on the generosity, the constant generosity and trust of our taxpayers. And we're going to do it again this year, and hope they trust us when they go to vote. And I mean, one of the things is stop recording and live streaming board meetings. That saves $19,000. Like access to our meetings. Where we do the business of this district. If we have to consider it, we'll consider it. But it's, I'd hate to give that up. So, I don't really have much to add to that. You guys all know where I stand on this. Anybody else? Okay. That completes the operations portion. And I will hand this over to whoever's doing policy and governance.
I think we've decided that Andrew is going to take the chair for policy and governance.
All right, thank you. We have 3 items with various sub items in them. So for starters, we have revisions to Board of Education policies and rules in the 600 and 700 series.
Thank you, Andrew. If you recall, for a few of you that have been on the board for more than 1 or 2 years, we adopted a policy review cycle, and we endeavor to review various different series of policies every 4 to 5 years. We are finally on our second review of those policy series, so I am happy to say that's what you're going to see tonight. And because we're in that review cycle, the changes are not as extensive as what you've seen in the past, because now we're finally getting into just routine updates of policy, which is what we should be doing for best practice. So with respect to the 600 series policy, Andrew, do you want me to just go through these individually?
I guess maybe just start with the highlights and then we'll see what's there for board questions, if any.
So for policy 672.51, we adjusted the language on the simplified acquisition threshold and removed the number because it keeps getting changed by the federal government. So that makes the policy stay relevant and not having to come back to adjust that. And then we just updated our cross references. With policy 673.1, we updated position names and cross references within that policy. For the rule for that policy, we updated language to reflect district procedures and better specified prohibited practices with respect to purchases and provided more information to staff on card security. Policy 690, we updated pronouns and we updated cross references in that policy. And then for the rule for 690, we simply updated positions. Any questions on the 600 series?
Okay, let's go into the 700s.
Policy 731, privacy in locker rooms, restrooms, and designated changing areas. We updated, put better paragraph headers so that people could reference different parts of the policy, and updated language with respect to the ability for emergency response staff to access those locker rooms and restrooms and designated changing areas, and then updated the cross references.
So there is no the only thing that would really be a substantive change in that one is we made clear that emergency responders, if they have to go into the other side, can go. There's no day-to-day life change in here whatsoever.
You're correct. Policy 732, this is probably the most substantive change in all the 700 policies. We were approached by another school district earlier in the school year regarding the use of unmanned aircraft, otherwise known as drones, during football games. As you know, technology continues to evolve and evolve and evolve, and a number of school districts are now using drones to capture footage of live football games in order for teams to review that footage for upcoming games. WIA has adopted a policy to allow this and has a number of specifications with respect to if you're going to allow drones, what does that look like? And so we thought that we should be on the forefront of this and be proactive and adopt a very clear policy and clear guidelines if we're going to allow those drones at our outdoor sporting events and what that would look like. And then Tim Flood working with the two conferences that our schools are in, hopefully this would then be adopted throughout the conference. And so we all are acting under the same rules and regulations in using drones. We worked with Justine and Lori. Justine is our drone expert. She's a certified drone pilot, and made sure that the language provided for the safety features and the other requirements that the FAA requires for called piloting drones. So that's what you see here.
James?
So in reading this policy, I just was left, and maybe I'm misreading it. So there are restrictions where you can't fly the drone over the stadium, like the seating. You can't fly it over the field, nor can you fly it over the parking lot. Where will they fly it?
The end zones.
Just in the end zones.
Just in the end
Okay.
zone.
Thank you.
And that's what they do in stadiums where they're allowed to fly
Okay,
it.
thank you.
Anything else?
I'm just wondering, you mentioned that somebody has a certification or a license or whatever. So, and I haven't picked this apart, but would that be a requirement for somebody to operate a drone at anything, regardless of if it's a football game or a track meet or any kind of activity that our students are at? They would have to be licensed and require that. Okay.
Yes, and it's in the policy.
Okay, anything else? All right, let's continue to the next one.
So then exhibit 732 would be that request document. So we would include that in our board docs so that it's accessible, and this would be the request document that would need to be submitted. And I also want to thank Kale for bringing this forward as well and making sure that our facilities are safe and secure, and we're going to have the proper signage if this is approved. Okay, policy 771.1, use of copyrighted materials, just some very minor updates and then updating the cross references. Policy 771.2, intellectual property, updating cross references, and policy 780, updating cross references.
All right, any board questions on those? All right, hearing none, we'll move to adoption of, and that's just the exhibit to go along with the drones in Part B? Good.
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Because we're adopting an exhibit and the other things were just policy changes. And so that's an adoption because it's a new item. Got it. Okay, question on that? All right, and then adoption of policy 832.
So this is adoption of policy 832 exhibit 2. And I didn't tell Vicki I was going to put her on the spot, but I am going to put her on the spot because she had conversations with legislatures past Friday on this new legislation at her CISA meeting. So to tee Vicki up, the governor signed on December 9th, 2025 into law Assembly Bill 774, which says each school board shall annually provide parents and guardians with information regarding their rights to access records regarding school employee discipline under subchapter 2 of chapter 19. In addition to that, this is a part of the language that they adopted that we have to immediately give parents notification with respect to allegations under Title IX. So Vicki, do you want to add anything?
This was legislation introduced by Ben Franklin, which he's a really great guy, by the way. If you ever have a chance to have a conversation with him, and last Friday he asked, for example, for time with us to learn more about our budget because things aren't jiving with what he's hearing. So I'm looking forward to that opportunity. He presented it because he heard from a district that parents weren't notified in a timely manner of an abuse. But I can tell you with certainty that that doesn't happen here. It wasn't a Northeast Wisconsin school district, but he moved forward with the legislation anyway. But it's what we do. It's what we do. Parents should know.
So this doesn't change anything for us. So. And that's it.
Okay, then if there's no questions, that concludes the policy section.
Thank you, Andrew. And with that, we come to the end of the agenda for the work session, and I would ask Lynn to read the motion to adjourn into closed session.
I move that the board convene into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Section 1G, conferring with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved, more specifically to it, potential litigation matters regarding the district, and Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Section 1C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, to wit, superintendent search discussion on developing interview questions to evaluate applicants and review applicants' pre-screening results.
Second.
I'll just make a statement before we vote that there are two wit statements in there, 2 reasons to go into closed session. We are not going to need number 1. That has been postponed. We're only going to have a closed session about the second, considering employment, promotion, and compensation. All right, Kinsey?
McCoy,
Aye.
Lyerly,
Aye.
Gerlach,
Aye.
Minnow, Cannell,
Aye.
Meister,
Aye.
Becker.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned into closed session. Thank you.
You have been watching the Green Bay Area Public School District's Board of Education meeting. Please visit the school district's website, www.sbdc.org. www.gbaps.org for more information on the district and future meeting dates. If you cannot fully access the information on this video, please let us know the accessibility issue you are having by calling 920-448-2025 or by email at communications@gbaps.org. We will try to provide the information to you in an alternative format and/or make the necessary improvements to make the information accessible.